Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're really glad that you could be here tonight. My name is Dave Reckes, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of 3GNY. I am also the grandson of four Holocaust survivors from Poland and Russia. And as we jump in tonight, I do want to acknowledge I know there's been some technology challenges with a Verizon outage across parts of the country tonight. And so this program will be recorded. So if you have friends who are trying to sign in but could not, you can let them know that we will send the recording out and it will be posted to our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. For those of you who are new to 3GNY, we are an educational nonprofit organization for grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and our supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and the lessons of the Holocaust, and our mission is to educate diverse audiences about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. We empower 3Gs to share their stories. 3GNY's flagship educational initiative, WEDU, which is short for We Educate, empowers grandchildren of survivors to compellingly share their families' Holocaust experiences in school classrooms and with community groups. Through our grandparents' stories, we provide a human face to the past and a living link to the present, inspiring our listeners to stand up to hatred and to act with courage and compassion, something that the world needs desperately today. Since 2005, when we were formed, 3GNY has trained and engaged over 600 speakers in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and now through our national Living Links network across the country and into Canada and Australia as well. We've shared our stories in more than 2,000 classrooms and have impacted more than 80,000 students and community members. That reminds me that hope is not lost. We need to keep doing this work now more than ever. You can help us accomplish this through a financial gift. This will go directly toward engaging more speakers with schools and schools reaching more students with these impactful stories. We don't solicit donations from schools or teachers. We aim to provide all of our programs for free to schools to reduce any barriers that there might be for helping students connect with moving personal testimony from the Holocaust. Similarly, we provide community programs such as this one this evening to help us all find meaning and connection through our shared history and identity. We're grateful for your donations to support our work and programs like this one. And later there will be a link in the chat where you can give a donation if you would like. And I know many of you have already, and we thank you tremendously. Tonight's program is really exciting. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. The people that you are going to meet are wonderful humans, first of all, smart, thoughtful, dedicated storytellers, and accomplished authors. I got to meet Julie Brill, one of our guests tonight, when I first started at 3GNY several years ago. Julie has been an instrumental part of our speaker training program and a volunteer speaker through our We Do program. And early on in our friendship, Julie started sharing some of her essays with me that were being published in magazines and online journals, and her writing drew me right in. I knew that she had important stories to tell and was telling them in a way that made me think, made me curious, and taught me some new things about the Holocaust and about myself. A little while later, I had a chance to meet Kirsten over the phone. We had some great conversations. And then 2 years ago, we had a chance to work together and talk together at the annual conference of the World Federation of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants. And similarly, Karen impressed me right away with how she tells her stories, why she tells her stories, and the ways that she seeks to engage audiences and communities. I have not met Caroline until this evening, but I have read her work and similarly felt that enthusiasm and that vibrancy jump off the page. And throughout the conversations that I've had with these authors, as well as with many of you and those in our community, I hear often about people who are looking for creative ways to tell their family story, to reach audiences, to ensure that the experiences of their families and of ourselves continue to provide inspiration and learning and insight into our world today and how we can create a better world for the future. And so, with that in mind, I was really excited to start talking with Julie and Karen and bring in Caroline to get their insights about how they went from idea and story and history into a published book that is available for sale. I highly encourage you each to buy and read all three of them, and I will put those links in the chat as well. And we'll have a chance to talk and learn about their process for writing their books, as well as the process for publishing, marketing, and what it means to now have their own family story out for others to read. And having done so in a way, really thinking about what are people going to want to read? How can we do this in a way that is going to not only get people to buy the book and open the book, but really excite people to continue reading and thinking and finding insight from their words. So with that, we have an active Q&A. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask any of our guests throughout the evening, you can open the Q&A feature in the Zoom panel. We'll take some time at the end specifically for those. But I'd love to just provide a little bit more of a formal introduction for our three panelists, and then we'll get to hear from them. So Julie Brill, as I said, in addition to being a volunteer and a speaker trainer with the Living Links speaker training program, Julie is the author of the new book, Hidden in Plain Sight, A Family Memoir and the Untold Story of the Holocaust in Serbia, which Menachem Kaiser, another author whom we've featured at a 3GNY program, called a powerful reminder of why our stories, personal, familial, historical, are so crucial. Julie, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, Dave.
Kirsten is the author of Irina's Gift, a 2025 National Jewish Book Award finalist, which was described by the judges as reads like a thriller, and it really does. And it was the winner of the Zibby Awards for Best Family Drama and Best Story for Overcoming, and the Australian Jewish Book Award finalist. Karen, thanks for joining us tonight.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And Caroline Topperman is a writer and book coach, born in Sweden, raised in Canada, who specializes in transforming complex intergenerational histories, migration, and Jewish identity into powerful narratives. She is the author of the hybrid memoir, Your Roots Cast a Shadow, and the writer's toolkit, Tell Me What You See. Caroline, it's really great to meet you and to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm going to post the links to all of the three of these wonderful authors' books in the chat. I highly recommend that you order them if you haven't yet. They'll also be in our follow-up email in the next couple of days. And by way of introduction, I would love for each of you to tell us all just a little bit about yourself and about your book. And remember, tonight's program is not necessarily a typical book talk. So you're not going to hear all about each individual book. But by way of introduction, tell us just a brief synopsis of your book and the audience that you were writing for. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and get us started.
All right, I'll start.
Thanks, Karen.
So, as Dave said, Irina's Gift is essentially a family drama, and it's about what happens after my mother receives a letter from a stranger when she was 32, who told her that she was smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto in a backpack and later rescued by a notorious Nazi SS officer. And if that wasn't enough to give her a heart attack, the letter said that her mother had been murdered by the Gestapo, and that the people she thought were her parents who traveled with her to Australia as refugees were actually her aunt and uncle. And my mother kept that secret from me. And when I was a teenager, I discovered that the grandparents I adored weren't my biological grandparents.
Thank you, Karen. And when you began writing your story, did you have a particular audience in mind?
I did not. I thought I was just writing it for my family. I started a blog when I was in Poland doing the research. So I did not start out thinking I would publish a book.
Very interesting. Thanks, Karen. Julie, why don't we go to you?
Yeah. So I grew up hearing my family's stories of the Holocaust, my dad's stories, But my dad was from Belgrade, Yugoslavia, so the stories never matched what I thought I knew about Holocaust history. To the point I somehow thought, yes, my grandfather was murdered by Germans, but no, the Holocaust hadn't come there. The book, Hidden in Plain Sight, is this quest to fit my family story into a Holocaust narrative that most people don't know, the Holocaust in Serbia. And I originally thought it would be for my kids and my niece and nephew, and then realized there were no books in English on the Holocaust in Serbia, and that it needed to be a book for a wider audience, that all these stories were really important. And so I wrote this book so that that story would be known, but it's really also just for anybody who thought, like, my story starts before I was born. Like, I showed up here and I got plugged into this story, and which is very much my feeling, like understanding the Holocaust and how my family came through it fit pieces into the puzzle of who I was and how I was with my kids and my parents. So the story is just this quest to understand, who I am, who we are, how we got here, and the story of the Holocaust in Serbia. There's a note
Great.
in the chat. I don't know if are people seeing the chat? Someone is saying it's only we can see it.
Oh, thank you, Julie. Yes, someone says, yes, you can see the chat. Great.
Excellent.
Thank you. Wonderful. Um, and Caroline.
Yes, so my book, Your Roots Cast a Shadow, I actually started quite early, a good number of years ago, when I decided to sell almost everything I owned and move to Poland, sort of on a whim. And once I got there, I just started seeing disturbing headlines, and I started seeing um, fascist marches through the streets, and I started doing more deeper dive into my family. And somewhere along the way, I inherited my grandfather's unpublished book, which is actually
Mm.
in the whole it's in the whole Holocaust memorial system. And there's a copy at Stanford at in their archives at the Hoover Institute. And I finally, my Polish was good enough that I could read it. It was a slog and a half because the man's an engineer and he wrote like one. Very unreadable. And I realized that the headlines that I was seeing in real life were very similar to the headlines he had written about. And I thought at that point, this needs to come out because history repeats itself. And my family also had a little bit of an unusual journey where my maternal grandparents actually survived the Holocaust in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, because they fled east. And they returned to Poland in 1944 and then were later part of the 1968 expulsions, which was, of course, not the Holocaust, but a direct, um, it happened. It was just like a next step after the Holocaust, I guess. So I think it's very, I think it attaches itself to the Holocaust as well, because about 25,000 Jews left Poland at that time. So that's my books is spans the time that I lived in Poland, after we moved there.
Yeah, thank you. And Caroline, this is not a spoiler for anyone who hasn't read Caroline's book yet, but it opens with that scene of deciding almost on a whim to uproot and move to Poland. And had the privilege of visiting Poland this spring with the 3GNY trip there, and it completely changed my perspective on the country and on the history and the people there. And I don't think I'm going to act on it the way that you did anytime soon. But there's always that little inkling ever since I returned of like, what would it be like to just up and move there? So reading your book has given me some insight into that. But before we move on, Caroline, was there a particular audience that you had in mind when you started writing with a published book in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of how you get a book published like this. And so for me, it was right from the beginning. It's not dissimilar to Julie's actually, where I wanted it for the armchair traveler, the person who knows their families from somewhere, doesn't quite know their family history, but knows that their family's history is affects how they see the world. and affects what's happening and just wants to get to know that. So very similar to all those TV shows now where the stars are finding
Yeah.
their their roots. It was
Right.
it was that I had that in mind, that audience.
That's great. Thank you. And so since we're talking a little bit about publishing, and this is maybe starting with the end in mind, I'd love to hear a little bit about the process of publishing. I think that's on a lot of people's minds who maybe are descendants of survivors or survivors and know that they have a story that is compelling and that they feel needs to be told. The publishing world seems like very cloudy and no one really knows how to do that. And so, and are often told that it might be hard to get another Holocaust memoir published. So can you talk about your path to publishing and what that was like, or any lessons learned for people who might be thinking about that route?
It is really hard to get these stories published, particularly after October 7th. The first thing is you have to have a really polished manuscript. And in the US, if you want to publish traditionally, which I did, you have to have a literary agent. And in my case, when I was ready, or when I thought I was ready, I queried over 40 agents. I didn't do it at the same time. I researched each agent and queried them, and I got 11 requests to read the full manuscript. And then after January the 6th, the insurrection and the Camp Auschwitz t-shirts, um, that's when most of the requests to read the full manuscript came through. I ended up with 3 offers of representation from literary agents and decided to go with a Canadian agent. He had more of an international focus because my goal was to publish internationally,
Mm.
particularly because one of the agents told me that I had too many concentration camps in my book and I needed to remove some of them, and too many countries. And the reality is, as we 3Gs know, war splits families apart and they're scattered all over the world. So I went with with my Canadian agent. He sold the book to Penguin Random House in Australia, and it was published then in the UK and Ireland and then North America.
Wow. We've touched on this a little bit, but this truly is an international conversation tonight, with your books taking place in multiple countries, being published in different places. And if folks picked up on accents and locales, we have Julie is in Massachusetts, Karen is presently in Australia, and Caroline in Canada. These are the stories that bind us together. So,
Also, survivor communities were scattered all over the world. There was a large
yes.
community in Canada. My biological grandfather was in Toronto, and Australia accepted the largest number of survivors per capita um, after Israel. But a lot of people don't know that until Bondi. I didn't know that.
Right. It's been in the news a bit more recently for unfortunate reasons
Yeah.
because of Buckeye. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started off like Karen did, querying agents, looking for an agent, and sending my manuscript out. And the sort of consistent feedback I was getting was great writing, really interesting story, and like people have Holocaust fatigue. Like it's really hard to get it's hard to get a book published, but it's hard to get a Holocaust story published. There has to be something different, a different angle or a different story or something. In the end, I went with a publisher called Amsterdam Publishers that does just Holocaust books, mostly memoirs and nonfiction and a little bit of fiction. And it's a great home for my book. There's no discussion about Holocaust fatigue, and there's a really solid understanding of how to market this kind of book because that's all they do. It feels like a good place to be. It's called Amsterdam Publishers. So, and Caroline has a third different kind of story.
Exactly. So I did the same as Julie. I started by querying agents. I had the same response. Great writing, important story needs to be told, not sure how I can sell it. So I actually am with a completely traditional press as well. And it's HCI Books. They're in the States. And you know, I thought my editor there was fantastic. I've had a really great relationship with them as well. Um, And it's, again, it's one of those topics that can be easy or hard. But I actually spoke with an agent today about another book that I'm writing, and she was very excited that I talk about the Holocaust in the book. And so, I mean, excited, that it sounds terrible, but I hope everybody knows what
Yeah.
I mean.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I think that it's just it's I think for most people, it's just about being persistent. And then we will talk about this in a minute, but how you are angling your book, how you're presenting it, how you're marketing it. Um, and that's what's going to make the difference of how you find
Yeah.
your home.
So I have to ask and show my naivete about this process. You all mentioned querying an agent. So if anyone out there is similarly wondering, what does that mean? Are you literally like Googling publishing agents and sending them cold call emails?
Kind of. So there are different there's different ways that there are I queried a lot in person as well, or over Zoom at different events, because you can do
Mhm.
that. I always like to do that because then you have that personal connection with the agent. So I always
Mhm.
recommend that, even though it'll cost a little bit of money. But there are places like Publishers Marketplace where there are just lists of agents and what they publish and how often they publish.
Mhm.
Costs a little bit of money, but you can buy it monthly, so it's like $30 US a month, so not terrible.
Mhm.
There's manuscript wish list, which I love as well, where you can find agents, where you can research them. There's Query Tracker. Um, I
Okay.
always recommend getting on Jane Friedman's list, because she does a lot of who's agents as well. She'll talk about that. So yeah, that's what you do
Great.
when you start with a query letter. But each agent and each publisher is different with what they want.
See a lot of head nods. And
Yeah.
I also heard from each of you in your description that you had to query numerous agents, right? So it's not just you call one person and great, now you got a book deal, right?
It's,
So being
yeah.
prepared for a bit of a slog, perhaps, or I've heard lots of people talk about being prepared for rejection when
Oh
you
yeah.
are shopping
It's,
your
yeah.
book around.
It's
Yeah.
There's
very
a
much
lot.
a numbers game. One of the things that I did was I looked at books that I had read. Usually in the back, people will thank their agent, and if
Mm.
it's a book with a similar topic or a Jewish topic or, kind of the similar story, you feel like, oh, maybe that agent likes this kind of thing. And then I would write to them and I would mention the book that had led me to them and that kind of thing. Yeah, but
Yeah.
there's rejection and there's just like quiet quitting, like you don't even get rejected, you just get nothing.
I think it's really
Yes.
important to be part of a writing community, like have people around you, because that it's a slow process. It's a painful process. And then once you get an agent, your book goes out on submission. That's like horrific. And so it's really good to have people around you that you can say, I haven't heard anything for a month. What do I do? Just people who've been through it before, who can really bolster you up. It's really important to have community.
That I very much hear that, and I know Karen, you've led some workshops for writers to bring people together and to work on those skills and have a space to talk about that together. So that's wonderful. 3JNY and Living Links, we've offered a writing space, a little bit less on the professional publishing side, but more on just a community of writers. And there are several others within the Holocaust descendant community, ways to connect with other people who are similarly trying to write and find outlet for their voice, which is important. Um, so since we mentioned, once you get somebody who responds and shows a little bit of interest, Julie, you said that finding a way to make sure that the story you are telling stands out in some way, right? There's something unique, there's something special, there's something about your story and the way you tell your story that is different than the other memoirs and novels and books that are already out there. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you go about making your story really stand out. How do you find that spark or that nugget or that thing that's going to excite an agent and a publisher and an audience?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with draft after draft of your story while you figure out what your story is. I don't know. Maybe there's somebody who's so gifted they don't have to do that. But it starts with really understanding what your story is. That's by writing it. That's by talking about it and people responding and you figuring out what the common questions are. I wrote a lot of short essays. You mentioned that earlier, Dave, and that was really helpful for me. Like both seeing what that there was interest out there in the story that I was telling, the story of the Jews of Serbia, and also getting used to being in conversation with people I didn't know about family
Mm,
stories that previously 7 people on the planet knew, and now we're like out in the world. And that refined the conversation, like what people had questions about, where they wanted the story to go, very much shaped the book. But I think if you have a family Holocaust story and you're thinking about making a book, like what is unusual either about the story, what happened, in 1942, or your relationship to the story, or something that is a spark that's
mm.
going to make somebody pull your book off that Holocaust shelf.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned the idea of this very private family story now being in conversation with who knows how many strangers,
Yes.
and that can be difficult. It can be challenging. It can be really rewarding. And when we were chatting before the webinar began, we were talking about how vulnerable that can feel. Um, what I heard from you now, Julie, is that that also becomes a nice sounding board for helping you kind of hear your story through a stranger's eyes and help you find those things that make it unique, that make it spark, that make it really compelling to make someone want to know more.
Exactly. You really feel like what I'm writing is in conversation with people. I'm not just sitting and typing on my computer. There's more to it out there than that. And there's also, I mean, we can talk about October 7th and all that, but there's kind of a specific kind of Jewish hate that comes at
Mm,
you that
mm,
also it's good, I think, to practice in small doses.
yeah.
But I don't want to be too discouraging. I mean,
Hmm.
overall, it's been very wonderful having the story out in the world. I've connected with other Jews from Serbia, which I never
Oh,
expected. There
wow.
aren't that many of us, and now,
Right.
like there's a little online community that we've made. So there have been definitely unexpected things, and people tell me their family secrets now. Like strangers, we were talking about this before, email me, not just necessarily war stories, just things that have happened to their families because they feel like they know me, and I've shared some of my secrets.
I I just got chills a little bit because of that, because the I always find that when you are willing to share with vulnerability, which all three of you do tremendously through your stories, people respond in kind. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're seeing, is that they're sharing their vulnerable stories with you because they see you as someone who understands and is empathetic and can listen because you have so openly shared. Um, so one of the things, there are several things that I noticed in all three of your books, but first and foremost is that each of you show up very prominently as a character in your book. It is not strictly a telling of your family story. It is your journey to discovering and embracing your family story, such as it were. And so, uh, is that, do you feel that that's essential as a 3G to place yourself into your grandparents' story, or a 2G is into your parents' story? And if so, how did you find the right way to place yourself into the narrative?
Yes, yes, and yes, you have to be in you have to be in your story. When I figured out I was going to publish a book, I wanted to write a book for people who knew nothing about the Holocaust.
Mm,
And it took me 10 years overall, but I did what Caroline did and went to writing conferences and paid for agents to read the beginning of my manuscript. And they all told me that I was missing. I wasn't in the memoir, and that I
mm,
needed to be a fully fleshed out character, but I needed to be the conduit to my family's history, that I needed to examine, hey, what was it like growing up with these damaged people? And in order to do that, I realized that I had been asking the wrong central question.
mm,
That's like it's the driver, it's the engine that drives a story. It's what takes a reader from page one to the last page. And so I'd been asking, as many of us do, how did my mother and my grandparents survive the war when 90% of Poland's 3.3 million Jews were murdered? And in order to insert myself into the story in the present timeline, I needed a new question. So what I did was I completely changed the book and I focused on the toxic relationship between my mother and my grandmother Alicia, the woman who I thought was my grandmother. My mum had always, since she'd been reunited with the wrong parents after the war, and she actually told me that her parents beat her. And I had observed myself growing up that my grandmother Alicia could barely stand to be in the same room as my mother. So I changed that central question, and I recommend you experiment this to come up with that hook that Julie was talking about. So I changed my question to why did my grandmother appear to hate my mother when I knew during the war she had risked her life over and over to save her? So now, the beginning of the book, I had workshopped 15 different beginnings and couldn't land on the right one because I was asking the wrong question. And so now the opening scene it shows you this toxic relationship between my mother. The other thing that I found really helpful is an instructor told me once is you need to split yourself into two people. You, it's called the I narrator and the I character. So the I character is you, the flawed person who the action is happening to. And the I narrator is up here, the trusted voice that is guiding the reader through the story. So yes, you need to be in your grandparents' stories. I recommend experimenting with that central question and experiment with splitting yourself into the narrator and the character.
Yeah.
That is a really interesting exercise. And even uh, looking for what those other questions, those driving questions might be, sounds to me like a really good journaling prompt. Thinking
Absolutely.
about what are some of the other questions that I'm not asking yet.
Can
Yeah,
I
sorry,
add to
Julie.
that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I just want to say that, so I mean, I can guess everything to what Karen said, 100%. Um, and, when I was writing mine, for example, when it was accepted for publication, you work with an editor who's going to go over it and they're going to, do their own, no matter how well you've had it edited, they're going to go in and do their own editing. And I actually wound up adding almost 9,000 words to my book
Wow.
about me because I
Oh,
am the
wow.
person who will keep myself out of the story. And
Yeah.
even though I had framed it through the lens of my 4.5 years that I lived in Poland, I still didn't put enough of me in it. And the thing to remember when you're writing these books is that, or these stories really, is that you the way people are going to relate to it is they're going to identify with something. They're going to identify with you. They're not going to, they're not going to, nobody's going to really identify with my grandmother or my grandfather or my parents in that way because that I'm that middle person that they're going to connect to.
Mhm.
And that's how you have to think about it. And guaranteed across the board, agents and publishers will say, okay, but where are you in the story?
Mm.
That's how you have to sort of think at some point too, which is hard, but you have to think of your book as this product that you're giving away. It's personal while you're writing it. These stories are personal. I'm sure we haven't talked about it, but I'm willing to bet money that both Karen and Julie probably had moments while they were writing their books, as I did, where you just sat and bawled your eyes out, right? Exactly. But then at some point you have to take that and separate yourself from it. And that's what makes the story because that's how people are going to relate to it because it's not just you crying and putting all the emotions on that page. There's one way to do this really well too, or like an exercise that really helped me because one of the things if you're trying to go for a traditional publishing deal is you need a book proposal.
Mhm.
And a book proposal it's a marketing document. It's a very big marketing document. It's usually somewhere around 50 to 60 pages, where you really have to break down who your audience is, why you think they'll buy the book. And the biggest thing that you have to do for that is you have to write an overview of your book, which sort of encompasses the whole document. I would recommend if somebody's working, I see there's some questions with people in the chat here about who are writing but aren't maybe prepared to pitch their book yet. Do not pitch an agent or a publisher until this thing is the best you can make it.
Mhm.
Because once you pitch an agent or a publisher and they say no, you kind of can't pitch them again.
Mhm.
So go and write a book proposal because you're going to have to have one anyway for a traditional deal. And that will really help solidify that central question, or I call it what's the point of your book? Karen's is a lot nicer. Um, but that central question, that's how you will figure out what you're trying to say with your book, what your book is really about. And that's a really great way to do that is by doing that book proposal.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a
Great
really helpful
advice.
suggestion,
I
Caroline.
agree with that. And I would
Me
just
too.
also say like read widely, like choose, doesn't have to be necessarily Holocaust books, but read widely so you know what the books are that you love that really resonate with you and think about how you could use those as models for your book. So we're talking about writing memoirs where we have to put ourselves in it, even if we don't want to be the guide for the reader so that they're seeing it through our eyes and they're learning the history as we learn it. And that's what makes them care about it. And I read a lot of books like that. But there are books that are not memoirs where people have written their parents or their grandparents. Family Story, Redhead of Auschwitz is one that's done very well. So that's a decision that you can make as you write yourself into it, see how that goes. Write it without
Mhm.
it. That's the temptation. Do I have to be a character? And see kind of where it goes for you.
Those are
And
really great
read books
suggestions.
that are like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I reading more and seeing different ways that people present themselves and their stories to get a sense of different pathways in, different things that you like, maybe things that you don't like. That sounds really, really helpful. And it also feeds into this next question that we were talking about earlier. Um, there's obviously a lot that you don't know about the story and that you now have to write in a compelling way. And I know that the three of you did extensive research into your own families, documents, diaries, letters, looking through archives, looking for primary sources, all those kinds of things, and found a lot and were able to really piece together some valuable information that created timelines, created context, created rich tapestries that you could see and really place the reader in the moment. But I also imagine that not all of that was available to you in the archives and in the diaries. And so, how do you approach filling in the gaps to write about a history that you did not experience yourself?
I did a lot of perhapsing. Maybe this is what happened. Maybe this is what happened. I think my grandmother could have done this. To sort of let the reader into my thought process. And I was just very clear when I did it. Hey, maybe it went this way. I don't know. There's gonna be gaps. That's one of the frustrating things, but it's also part of the story. You know, I had this fantasy that this file would fall out of the sky and I would open it and all of the Brill history would be there. My book already, and
Didn't
since
happen
that
that
will
way?
never happen for any of us, like that's part of the process is we know this, we don't know this, it might have been like this. We heard another story that's similar. Ours could have been like that. I worked with a instructor and she had another eyewitness on a cattle car, not her family. And so she wrote about how maybe they were in the same car, maybe they saw the same thing. So sometimes you can find unexpected things in research that kind of fill a hole, and sometimes you have to just kind of guess and just be honest that you're guessing.
I watched a lot of Nazi propaganda videos.
Yes.
Ser- Seriously,
Really?
and it sounds like Caroline did too. You know, I wanted to capture the sounds, the smells, the physical sensations. And so I would combine the primary research I had with the interviews I'd done with watching these videos sometimes and listening to other people's testimony. Sometimes it would take me all day to write one or two sentences. And then the other thing I did would, you know, I had a lot of conflicting information. There was, in one instance, my grandparents were arrested by the Polish police before they were sent to prison, and then Auschwitz. And my grandmother had told me the police made my grandfather drop his pants so they could see if he was Jewish. But then when I got the I got from the archives their prison papers, I could see they were registered as Catholic. So what do you do? Well, my editor told me just grapple with that on the page. So I went to historian accounts. I learned as much as I could about the Polish Blue Police in that particular area, and I put it on the page for the reader so that they could make up their own mind. And I told the reader that I had this conflicting information. Readers are smart, but if you can do it accurately by showing them the different possibilities, and then they can make up their own minds.
And to be really clear too, like that because all three of us are writing creative nonfiction. And
Mhm.
in that, we have to be honest with our readers. Otherwise,
Yes,
it becomes fiction. So
exactly.
it's about
Right.
it. But I personally find the holes to be very interesting because there is conflicting information. And when I was at the Jewish Historical Institute this summer in Warsaw, I was talking to one of the genealogists, and and one of the things she said to me, she's like, "You're never going to know because even testimony isn't exact because it's just
Yeah.
people's memories and people lie." And I wanted to say one of the things that I thought was amazing when I read it was Julie Metz, Eva and Eve, her book. It's a few years old now, but one of the things that she did brilliantly, I thought, with her book, because it's a Holocaust book as well. She has photographs, and I think I was working with some. I had like three photographs,
Mm.
but it was this idea of what happened before the picture was taken, what happened after the picture was taken, and then she had this wonderful way of saying, in a photograph that doesn't exist but should.
Oh,
Mm.
And then
wow.
she tells what she thinks. So you have to, that's the creative part of this kind of writing,
Yeah.
which is the beautiful part of this writing.
That's haunting, to be honest. And at the same time, that technique of what happened before this photo was taken, what happened after it was taken, I've seen that used in classrooms as an educational tool to get students thinking and thinking creatively and critically about context and setting and action. And that sounds really compelling as a way to build a scene or build a story. And I love that description of that we're never going to know for sure. I know that all three of you did as much work as you possibly could to find out everything that you could so that you were as close to the truth as you can. But there's also something really beautiful about inviting your readers into those holes and to
Yeah.
join you in that unknown for a while and invite us to wonder with you and try to piece together what the lack of knowledge might mean for our understanding.
I've
Um,
got two more books because I think reading about watching how other people do them is helpful because I know we're about to go to questions. One,
yeah.
it was an instructor of mine, Alex Marzeno Lesnovich. It's not a Holocaust book, it's called Fact of a Body. And one Holocaust book that they recommended I read, which was really helpful, was Helen Fremont, by Helen Fremont. It's called After Long Silence.
Mm, great. And Karen, if you send those to me after our session tonight, I'll make sure to include those titles and Julie and Caroline, any others in the follow-up material that we send later this week.
Sure.
Um, thank you. So we are going to go in a moment to the Q&A. There's some wonderful questions, so thank you everyone who's submitted those. Feel free to put any others in the Q&A as well. As a lead-in, because I know there are some questions about this, I'm wondering if you can talk briefly about now that your books are published, about the promotion process, because I know, and I've heard from many people, publishing is not anywhere near the finish line. That's just the beginning. And now you are hustling and promoting and discussing. And how do you do that? What shape does that take? And how does the world at large today collide with your goal of promoting and sharing your book?
I mean, I pitched over 100 places last year alone.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and a lot of it is a lot of it's a long game. I actually tested out ideas for my book to start on social media, which was really great for me. And so I came back to a lot of that to the people that were commenting on those. But for example, I'm preparing to do a writing workshop at the Toronto Holocaust Museum, but this is something that I started talking to them in like end of 2025. And I won't be doing it probably till May. So a lot of this is just preparing that, things way in advance. And it's just, but a big part of it is how are we all here this evening? I reached out to Julie and said, hey, our books are kind of similar. Maybe we should talk. And then Julie was like, well, funny you should bring that up because Karen and I are friends, and this is how we came about today. So it's about that. It's about what Karen said at the very beginning. It's about finding that community and creating that community, and finding your foothold in there. And for my book, I have part of my book takes place in is part of Afghanistan too, so it's a little bit all over. But it was also that, and I had an opportunity to meet and be part of the Afghan community in Toronto. So that's how you're going to do this, and it's going to be hard, and there will be days where you're crying and and being very emotional, and why doesn't anyone want to buy my book? But that's what this is. That it really, it's just about that long game. And I would say start doing it before, and you want to start actually doing it before your book's out. That's when you start promoting your book,
Yeah.
before it's on the shelves.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions that relate to that in the Q&A about all the way back to the beginning of any suggestions about how to start writing, as well as the process of, Julie, we mentioned the essays that you had published, or Caroline talking about teasing out parts of the book over social media or in other formats. So I think the questions are getting at how those different stages in the writing process feed into this finished product.
I would echo what Julie said about publishing articles. So my first ever essay was published in Narratively, and it got submitted for Best American, and that's where it started for me. That's where it helped me flesh out what the book was going to be about. But after October 7th, so my book was published in Australia just before October 7th, and then I was in the UK on October 7th. So I had a lot of experience with canceled interviews, canceled events, doxing, all that. And so for the US, what I did was when you get an advance, you need to make sure you put some aside of that if you're published traditionally to pay for a PR agent. And it was a difficult time. So I actually hired a publicity agent. I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of any progressive media covering the Holocaust. So I went with someone who had a track record with right-wing media and evangelical Christian media. And that I did really well, but what really did well was publishing an essay with Huffington Post. It's not a literary outlet, but it has a huge audience and they distribute to MSN and Yahoo. So that went viral. Yes, I got a lot of hate messages as well, but that actually did more for my book than any PR.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have to get creative. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what all of us have been doing. You have to get creative. You're a fish in a pond, basically, and you're in competition. Not, I don't mean that in a negative way, but there are so many books out there,
Mhm.
and so many family stories out there. That's this new genre that's really coming out now. And I think that's you just have to get creative with how you do it. How you find your audience, and you go for your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit like when you have kids and like nobody is as invested in your child as you are. Nobody is as invested in your book as you are. Like we worked too hard and too long to let our books just sit somewhere on a shelf. And the process of sending out to an agent and being rejected and trying to get it published and all that, it's the same process. So it's good practice. You're able to talk about what your book is like. It's okay if people don't respond, you'll email them again. There's a persistence to this and kind of a numbers game.
And do you have from your experiences, do you have insight to share about the differences between a traditional publishing house versus a more focused publishing house like Amsterdam versus there's the self-publishing route and other kinds of publishers or ways to get your book out there?
I
Sure.
think it's a, oh, Sorry,
Okay.
Carol. I was going to say you need to answer the question about the small publishers, but I think it depends on what your goal is. Not everybody, my goal was I wanted to publish internationally. So I had to go for one of the big five publishers. Over to you, Caroline.
Actually run a small hybrid press. I do not, we don't publish our own books because competition. But so there are so many different ways to publish. I'm with a small, but fully traditional press. My book is distributed by Simon and Schuster. Actually, my press distributes with them. So, um, and it just depends, you're really looking for that home for the people who you think will best represent your book, the people who you think will help. You're going to be doing a lot of your own marketing anyway. Don't think that one publisher will take care of it more than another. It's about 6 weeks of publicity that they give you, but I actually hired a publicist, sorry, for Canada specifically because my book is with the US. So you just have to really think about. I mean, I said this before, but you have to think of your book as a product and you're selling a product.
Mm,
For me,
yeah.
I love the fact that where Karen found a lot of her audience. I think that's brilliant because it's
Mhm.
outside of the box. I've found because I am not part of a synagogue in Toronto, I found breaking into the Jewish community in Toronto rather difficult
Mm.
because it's very segmented here. And so I had a really hard time with that. So I really had to find a different place for my audience. And I don't I don't know that it matters. I mean, and with self-publishing, I think you have to put in just as much work because you still want the best product out there. I mean, unless if you're doing this for friends and family, sure, maybe you don't need as much editing and as much you don't have to put as much effort into that. But in that case, you're looking for book cover designers and all of that too. And then you have to think about how you market your book on Amazon or Meta or
Right.
wherever. But a lot of it's going to be the same work, really.
Thanks. That's really helpful in thinking about the audience and your goals first and foremost. Um, we have just a few minutes left. There's still so many tremendous questions in the Q&A, so thank you everyone for putting them in. I will share all those questions with our panelists, and if there are opportunities to either respond personally or in our follow-up email, we will. You can also always feel free to write to 3GNY or to me directly to pass a question along to Karen, Julie, or Caroline. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, this is a little bit from the Q&A and a little bit just from my own curiosity. This has been a long process for each of you in researching your story, writing your story, thinking about your story, and then, as we said, really vulnerably and with a lot of conviction and a lot of persistence, sharing your story with the world. What is what's one way that this process has enhanced your connection to your family?
Hmm.
In just a minute or less.
I mean, my book is about getting to know my father in a different way and learning the history through research that he does not have the skills or the time or the interest to do, and passing that history up to him. And it's been transformative. It was a thing that we could learn together. And then I think my whole family has gotten closer by knowing the story as told by me. They all have their own ideas about what the story is, but I'm the one that wrote it down. And then having this outside interaction that I was talking about, it's been really exciting for my parents, but also for my kids and stuff, my brother. So definitely has been a good family project.
That's great. Thank you, Julie.
Caroline, do you want to go next? I'm still thinking.
I mean, mine's the complete opposite. My family was everyone was mostly deceased when I started writing this book.
Mm,
And actually, after my book was accepted for publication while I was editing it, my father passed away, so he never got to see it
mm.
either.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry.
for me, you know, the one person that I thought while I was writing this book that I didn't want to anger, she's not even really in it, but it was my sister. And for everybody else, I thought, because it's family, sometimes things are messy. I thought that I had to like make that decision. Who am I going to anger? Who am I not going to anger? I don't know if anybody's read it in the further reaches of the family, but my family's very
Interesting.
small. I have very few people, so um, mine's more for the people.
Thanks, Caroline. And to our point from earlier, thanks for even sharing vulnerably just in that answer. So we appreciate it.
Two of my siblings have not read the book. I think they grew up with it, so they're not. We know in families there's usually one of us that's more obsessed with this history than the other. That was me. Um, my mum's adopted brother didn't want to talk to me after there was a 4-page excerpt at the beginning of the book that was published in in a national newspaper, and I'd warned him about it and said that's just the beginning of the book,
Mm.
keep reading. Your mother's the hero. Your Alicia's the hero. And he didn't talk to me after that came out, and it took 3 months after he actually did pick up the book and read it, and now we're much closer than we were before the book got published. So I'm happy about
That's great
that.
to hear. Yeah, I'm very glad to hear that too, Karen. Thank you. And really, Karen, Julie, Caroline, thank you so much for being with us here tonight and sharing these insights. Your process, this journey that you've been on, is tremendous and is really a gift to all of us. Those of you who joined us to listen in, thank you for taking the time to be with us and to learn with and from Julie, Caroline, and Karen. If you haven't yet purchased and read their books, please take the time to do so. The link is in the chat. It will also be in a follow-up email that we'll send in the next couple of days, as well as a brief survey that really helps us at 3GNY continue to plan programming that is of interest and impact for you, our community. So thank you for joining us here tonight. Thank you for creating this space for us to think about how we share our stories and why we share our stories, and what that means for all of us to share our family stories together. Those of you who are in the New York City area, I hope we see you next Friday night at our International Holocaust Remembrance Day Shabbat dinner. You can see our website for more information about that. And we hope to see you again at a future webinar and other programming. So thank you all very much for spending some time together this evening.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.